Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin the presentation shortly. Thank you again for those who are joining us now. We will begin soon. Thank you again for those who are joining. We will begin soon. Okay, great. Brad, would you like to begin?
Good evening, neighbors. My name is Brad Rawson. I'm a Somerville resident, and I serve the city as Director of Mobility. My team is responsible for a wide range of work. We manage public engagement, policy development, project design, program administration, construction logistics, development permitting, project finance, state agency coordination, and more. Our mission is to make Somerville the most walkable, bikeable, transit accessible city in America. Our little team is a part of a large city department that includes 20 affordable housing specialists, 5 small business specialists, parks designers and arborists, historic preservation planners. This organizational model really underlines the intersectionality of our work. Transportation is a means to an end. Transportation is about access to opportunity. It's about public health. It's about the climate emergency. It's about gentrification and displacement and the terrible legacy of systemic racism and other forms of exclusion in our society. But mobility is also about the joy of urban life, bumping into our neighbors on the sidewalk, patronizing our local businesses, walking our kids to school, taking pride in our community spaces and our civics. Our city staff are grateful to each and every one of you who have taken the time to join us this evening. This is a kickoff night, so your participation is really important at this stage. But thousands of our stakeholders are not here tonight. Our team is working to reach as many people as possible, and we'll describe those efforts tonight. We welcome your ideas and your support to engage the community. So finally, I call on all of us to behave in a civil manner tonight. It's been a shocking 5 years when you think about our societal norms. A poisonous atmosphere has been normalized, even celebrated across the country. It's not okay. I believe that Somerville is better than that. When we disagree, let's reach for empathy. We don't know what's happening in each other's lives. Each one of us is under pressure. Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. We're all in this together. So with that, I'm happy to note that in Somerville, we are blessed with excellent elected leadership. And I'm pleased to recognize several of our elected officials. Mayor Joe, would you care to go first, please?
Thank you, Brad, and good evening, folks. I'm sorry, I wanted to participate as much as I could for my location, other event tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being engaged. To carry up upon the words Brad mentioned, we pride ourselves on that civic engagement and debate. That's at the cornerstone of our democracy, and to be good listeners, to have empathy and respect for opposing views, to validly recognize concerns and that sense of loss, I would say trust the process and work with us. Our approach to Highland Avenue redesign and the debate around it is in line with the community's goals of creating an exceptional place to live, work, play, raise a family, grow old, and start a business for everyone. Our sustainability goals, our climate forward goals, our Vision Zero goals. We have data, we have information, but most importantly, we have the understanding and the patience and engage and willingness to listen, to hear and work with you. We want to hear all concerns, suggestions. We ask you to keep an open mind, to ask questions, to probe assumptions, but to be civil. That's what makes Somerville special. All our success is the product of many hands. Your activism, advocacy, and engagement has been a critical fuel to that. So I thank you for joining us tonight. I thank you, the staff and the elected officials as well. We have an incredible team of people working on our behalf here in Somerville. We should all be proud. I appreciate it. I look forward to further conversation. I just wanted to take a minute to help kick off the meeting, and thank you for participating.
Thanks, Mayor, and congratulations on your incredible service to our community. Now I'd like to recognize our Ward 3 Councilor, City Councilor Ben Ewen-Campen.
Thank you very much, Brad, and thank you to everyone for being here. My name is Ben Ewen-Campen. I am the Ward 3 City Councilor. So Ward 3 includes the part of Highland from the McGrath over to Central, including the high school and City Hall, and then the south side of Highland from Central to Porter. And of course, Highland also goes through Wards 5 and Ward 6. And this is very much going to be a team effort. So I'm going to be very brief. Point of tonight's meeting, as we've heard, is really to hear from the city's mobility department first, and then really to hear from all of you. And I just want to add that I live very near Highland myself. My 11-month-old kid goes to daycare on Highland. I walk on Highland, I bike, I drive, I shop there. Of course, I work on Highland when I'm at City Hall. And I know that this is an incredibly important issue. I know there are a lot of questions and concerns about this. I want to start out just by saying that I am very optimistic that we can be successful here in a way that makes Highland much more safe and pleasant for pedestrians, for people on bikes, people with disabilities, that supports local businesses and residents, people who live on Highland, people who work on Highland, and in a way that makes the MBTA buses more reliable. And I really believe that we can do all these things, but I also know that is going to take a lot of work together. And a lot of listening and planning to get this right. So I'm just here to say that tonight, obviously, all of us will be here however long this meeting takes. And going forward, I am absolutely committed to getting together with business owners, with residents, with members of city staff, and with my colleagues on the city council to continue working with you on all this. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Councilor. Next, I'm pleased to introduce our Ward 5 City Councilor, Mark Niedergang. Mark? Mark, can you engage your mute, please?
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Hello. There are over 300 people here and counting, which I think shows how much the community cares what happens on Highland Avenue. This will be my last meeting on this project in my capacity as a Ward 5 City Councilor, because Beatriz Gomez Muacad will be taking the position starting next year in January. But I live 1 block from Highland Avenue, right near Three Little Figs and Somerville Hospital, so I will continue to be involved. And I care deeply what happens on Highland Avenue, as I know so many of you do. So as others have said, please have compassion. Please listen well. We know that small businesses on Highland Avenue, we've been hearing from them, they fear for their businesses' survival due to parking issues. We know that pedestrians and bicyclists fear for their personal health, safety, and survival. So this is an issue that people care passionately about, but we won't get to the best possible solution unless we can listen to each other and work together. It's still early in the process, and I'm looking forward to seeing this project come to fruition in the next few years. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And similarly, congratulations on your long career of public service for our community. Next, I'm pleased to recognize our Ward 6 City Councilor, Lance Davis, who's with us this evening. Lance, please feel free to say a word if you'd like.
Thank you, Brad. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I will be brief. I'm here really just to listen and to hear, along with all you, the plans and then hear your feedback. I am, full disclosure, I live on Highland Avenue. The Ward 6 part of this project runs from about Cedar Street down to the beginning of Highland Avenue in Davis Square, although I think the project scope ends about at Cutter, if I'm correct there, Brad. So look forward to hearing all of your input as we move forward. Back to you, Brad.
Thanks very much, Lance. So Kate, Justin, if you'd be so kind as to advance a slide if you can. I know that we're having some technical difficulties. I'd like to make sure that folks know the city staff who are in the room. This is an in-house led process, and so you'll meet a few of our different staff this evening, and then we'll get into our program. Thanks again for bearing with us during the startup phase here. So I'm joined by the incredible members of my team on the mobility division. Viola Augustine is here. She serves as senior planner. Kate White is here. She serves as our outreach coordinator. And Justin Schreiber is here, our lead project manager. So Brian, would you care to introduce yourself and your team, and then we'll get into content?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad. I'm Brian Polstwaite. I'm the Director of Engineering, and I'm joined today by Dan Amelin, our project manager, who previously was the project manager on our Somerville Avenue project and is currently our project manager on the Spring Hill reconstruction project. The engineering division's primarily responsible in the city for managing our utility and infrastructure system, as well as our streets, and maintaining those assets in good condition. And the engineering division's also responsible for executing the street and utility construction projects, which this will be a part of. So this will be rolling into engineering once we get into the design process. And so we're going to be part of this till the very end. And I wanted everybody to know that we're here, part of the project, and making sure that it will, once all the design decisions are made, that it gets rolled into final construction correctly, safely, and well. Justin, would you carry on from here?
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so Kate, if you don't mind advancing our slide and starting to take us through our housekeeping, and then we promise that the next stage is actual content of the project. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So everyone, because of the size of the meeting that we're using a Zoom webinar tonight, you've all joined with muted microphones. If you haven't already done so, please rename yourself to include your first name and last name. We're using the chat to help collect questions tonight, so please send in your questions anytime during the presentation through the chat function, and we'll be organizing them and grouping the questions when we go into the discussion section, which we'll then go through. And then after answering written questions, there'll be an opportunity to speak additional questions or comment. To participate in this, please select the raise hand function. Depending on your Zoom function, you might find this in your reactions button. And then if you click on reactions, you can then click on raise hand. If not, it might be directly in your toolbar. And for some folks, it might also be in your participants window. And when we get to that time where we have out loud comment, we'll call on you when it's your turn and unmute you so you can share. If you're joining by phone this evening, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. If you have any technical difficulties at any point, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Kate White, through the chat box or at my email at kwhite@SomervilleMA.gov. So we're now going to launch a few polls, just get an idea of who's in the room and learn a little bit about each other. Just give me one moment. Actually, at this time, I'm just going to switch it over to my team member, Justin, who's going to share his screen.
Sorry, folks, just 1 second.
And although we asked our board councilors for the project area to introduce themselves, I see that Ward 4 Councilor Jesse Klingen is here. Councilor at Large Kristen Strezzo is here as well. So thank you, councilors.
So everyone, we just launched the poll. If you want to take a minute to fill it out, and we'll be happy to share back some of the things that we learned. Thank you folks for filling it out. We've got some coming in. And again, just give you about 60 seconds and then we'll end the poll and share it out. And again, I think we have some clarifying questions. Again, just input any into the chat. Either way, it's to everyone or on the panelists. We're going to make sure to read them out loud so that everyone can hear. Okay, give me about 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to close it now. So Justin, you want to take it away, share a little bit about the polls and then launch us into our next section.
Sure. So we can see, a wide variety of the way people are using Highland Ave. It looks like a lot of people are walking, biking, using all forms of transportation. I see a couple of folks had technical difficulties. No worries. There's going to be a survey launch on Highland Ave. So there will be an opportunity to answer these questions again, but in the interest of time, I think we want to move on to the meeting content. So here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to talk through an overview of the project, a little bit of the background of the genesis of this project and the vision for Highland Ave. We'll walk through parking data analysis that we've done on Highland Ave and in the neighborhoods nearby. We're going to talk a little bit about the outreach we've done, go through some next steps, and then take your questions and comments on what we presented, as well as your sort of general thoughts about the future of Highland Ave. So starting with the overview, I think we wanted to be very clear up front that while Highland Ave will be reconstructed starting in late 2023, there is no design yet. Design has not begun, and we don't have any plans to share tonight. So that's really important to just make note of there. This project was originally part of the Spring Hill Sewer Separation project, but was split into its own based on community input and based on clear direction from our elected officials. We do expect that there will be changes to parking and curb use. However, we also know there are many opportunities we have to better manage our parking resources, and we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. We have been collecting data on parking, on business surveys, and on customers on Highland Ave over the past couple of months to prepare for the design process. We want to collect your input. We want to collect as much information as we can about Highland Ave so that when we do have a designer on board, we have a really robust set of data to share with them as they begin designing the street. So again, there is no design yet, and we're really just starting this process tonight. Public engagement for the Highland Ave Redesign Project will include community meetings. It includes dedicated outreach and block walking to businesses and other stakeholders on Highland Ave and nearby. Also includes community alerts to abutters and nearby residents. If you haven't signed up for them, you can sign up at SomervilleMA.gov/alerts. This alert went out to about 20,000 contacts about 10 days ago to alert them of this meeting tonight. We're also doing street intercept surveys of the general public on Highland Ave. And there's a project website that'll have additional opportunities for input. So how do you give input on this project? On the project website, SomervilleMA.gov/HighlandAve. There is a public input map that's now live, and that allows you to highlight locations that you think it's important for staff to prioritize changes or improvements, as well as locations that are currently working well on Highland Ave. You can find that at SomervilleMA.gov/HighlandAve. And soon we'll also be launching a public survey, including many of the same questions we had in that quick Zoom poll tonight. You can contact us by email at transportation@SomervilleMA.gov. We're also interested in setting up stakeholder meetings. If you own a business or another organization on Highland Ave, if you have a group of residents that you want to have a conversation, please reach out to us and we can set up those conversations as well. And then finally, if any of your friends or neighbors are not using email or aren't able to get online, you can always call Somerville 311 and leave what's called mobility feedback. The 311 operators will get a message to us if you're not able to contact us by other methods, and that's 617-666-311. So in addition to all the input we're going to receive, this project is also going to be guided by the strategic plans and policies of the city of Somerville, such as Summer Vision, which sets the goal of 75% of work commutes happening via non-car modes by 2040, and asks the city to reduce the vehicle miles travel in its city and prioritize walking, biking, and transit access. The project will also be guided by our comprehensive climate change plan, Somerville Climate Forward, which identifies transportation as being about a third of the greenhouse gas emissions in Somerville, with personal vehicles making up nearly all of that. We also have a Vision Zero action plan, which puts forth our strategy for eliminating deaths and serious injuries from our transportation system. Highland Ave is a high crash corridor identified on the plan, which means it had greater than 100 crashes per mile over 5 years. There are also 5 high crash intersections on Highland Ave, which have had greater than 10 crashes over 5 years. And then just in the 2016 to 2020 period, there were 161 crashes in total on Highland Ave. And lastly, the city also has a complete streets ordinance, which requires the city to incorporate bicycle, pedestrian, and transit facilities whenever applicable and practical, which requires us to take every transportation project as an opportunity to improve the transportation system for users of all ages and abilities. It also asks the city to evaluate any potential adverse impacts of changes and to mitigate those impacts. It's also important to note that in addition to our city plans and community input, they all really represent a very, very wide range of requests and goals and needs, all of which must really be carefully balanced to achieve the best possible outcomes. And really our ground rules for this process include recognizing that there are many diverse and significant needs and limited space to achieve them, that all input deserves consideration and respect, even if it can't be completely satisfied. We have to actively listen and empathize with the input of all users. We must go beyond individual preferences. We must count people regardless of how they choose to travel. And we must also consider and speak for people who are not in this room tonight. With that, I'm going to turn it over to IAM Project Manager Dan Amelin. Dan?
Thank you, Justin. Again, Dan Amelin, Project Manager within the Infrastructure and Asset Management Department. One of the biggest motivating factors for this Highland Ave Redesign Project is to upgrade the city's underground utilities, such as drainage and sanitary sewer systems. And why do they need to be upgraded? There's a few reasons. First, many of our sewers, and many of the sewers on Highland Ave were constructed back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, meaning some of these pipes that exist underneath Highland Ave and adjacent streets are over 100 years old. And due to their age, our goal is to either replace or rehabilitate these pipes depending on their current condition so that we can aim and hope for another 100 years of service. Another reason is that many of these older pipes are actually combined sewers, meaning that just one pipe carries both sanitary flows and stormwater flows. When these systems are overloaded, they generate combined sewer overflows, which create serious water quality problems. In a similar fashion to the projects we have in Spring Hill and on Somerville Avenue, through this project, we aim to reduce localized flooding and minimize the number of combined sewer overflows by separating out the sanitary and stormwater by installing new drainage systems that can reduce the volumetric load on the capacity of our existing systems. Next. So one of the biggest challenges we have with this project, and one of the challenges that we'll be facing over the next few years here, is upgrading the city's infrastructure amongst a vast quantity of other utilities that are currently present underground. As you can see, this is a cross section of Highland Ave between Central Street and School Street. It generally shows the different types of utilities we expect to encounter during both the design and construction phases. In addition to new drainage and sewer pipes, which I just mentioned previously, there's a handful of other utilities that we take into consideration, such as water mains, electrical duct banks, natural gas mains, fire alarm duct banks, and a variety of pipes and services that were previously installed and have since been abandoned. Next. So the scope of this project obviously goes beyond sewer and drainage upgrades. We'll also be upgrading water mains and services, which tend to become tuberculated the older the pipes are. By upgrading our water system, our water mains, and our water services, it'll improve water quality, improve fire flow capacity, and improve water pressure in this portion of the city's distribution system. We'll also be improving and upgrading all signalized intersections along Highland Ave, including intersection retiming and sequencing to improve movements for pedestrians, public transit, and vehicles alike. We'll also be implementing green infrastructure features in this project. Some examples of green infrastructure include bioretention basins, tree and stormwater planters, silicels, and porous materials such as brick pavers and asphalt. What this green infrastructure will do will help mitigate surface stormwater runoff, allow for greater infiltration, and improve the water quality of the underground water table. And lastly, this project will incorporate mobility improvements such as wider sidewalks, raised crosswalks, improved bike facilities, enhanced bus stops, etc. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Viola Augustine, who will be presenting on the background for this project. Viola?
Unmute is an important thing. Good evening, everybody. Viola Augustine, Transportation Planner in the Mobility Division. And I will give a brief overview what has happened up until now and also introduce the Highland Avenue project. Next slide. So the Spring Hill Sewer project that Dan just described is separated into different project areas to be designed and implemented at different times. Each of these areas include utility improvements indicated in the light blue and light pink color on this diagram, and they include streetscape improvements indicated by the lines. Next slide. The design for Area 1, both underground and above ground, has started a few years ago, and it included Central Street, Summer Street, School Street, and Highland Avenue. The last public meeting in December 2020, conceptual designs were presented. And the public spoke loud and clear after they saw at the meeting that the design for Highland Avenue focused on pedestrian and transit improvements and did not include separate bicycle lanes. So the city, both mayor and council, reacted and gave clear directions to revisit the design to include safe bicycle infrastructure for riders of all abilities. Next slide. So as a result of this feedback and the mayor's and council's input, Highland Avenue became its own project. The way the work on project area 1, the work on project area 1 could continue, including the underground work on Highland Avenue from Central to McGrath. And that is shown here in blue. And the construction in this area might even start this year. So if you will see construction on Highland Avenue between Central and McGrath, that is only for underground. It has nothing to do with the streetscape design. The streetscape design for the entire stretch of Highland Avenue from Cutter to Hamlet will start at the beginning of next year and is part of this initial kickoff meeting. And it will also include the underground utilities on Highland from Cutter to Central. I know that's a little confusing, but I think for this meeting, the important thing is streetscape design is from Cutter to McGrath, and that is what we separated out. Next slide. So to recap the timeline for project area and Highland Avenue, you see on this slide that area 1, the preliminary design started in August 2019, and all of area 1, except of Highland Avenue streetscape, finished design, bidding, and will start construction this winter. Highland Avenue was initially part of the project area 1, and so it went through preliminary design, including a transit priority study, until last December, after the public meeting and the feedback, it became its own project. So far, we've done data collection and outreach to businesses and customers. We started that this fall and are continuing, and the design will start this winter and is planned to finish next year, the spring approximately. And I'm sorry, I'm like confusing myself. So the design will start in the winter of this year and is planned to finish spring 23 with construction starting at the end of 2023. Next slide. So what is the vision for Highland Avenue now? Next slide. Again, like all of our projects, the vision for Highland Avenue includes goals from all our Somerville plans and policies, and the directives from both the mayor and the council to include protected bike lanes, while at the same time evaluating curbside usage. Next slide. So in particular, the vision includes pedestrian prioritization that is creating safe, comfortable, and accessible environments for people of all abilities using the sidewalks and crosswalks. The improvements to the Highland Avenue streetscape will combine stormwater functions, as Dan just mentioned, with streetscape elements that will contribute to a safer and more pleasant experience when using sidewalks and bicycle lanes. Next slide. The vision also includes transit improvements such as better bus stops and signal updates that will result in easier and faster trips for transit users. Next slide. The new design acknowledges Highland Avenue as a major connection to many important destinations: the high school, library, city hall, hospital, commercial nodes. Protected bike lanes are part of this vision to make it possible for people of all comfort levels and ages to reach these destinations. Next slide. A new and improved Highland Avenue will include parking on one side, and unlike today where parking spaces are not used effectively and equitable, it will include improvements to the design and availability of ADA spaces, loading, unloading zones, pickup, and drop-off areas. A lot of the outreach we have done in the last few months focus on understanding the needs, especially for curb usage, of all users, residents, and businesses on Highland Avenue. We also worked to understand current availability and usage of parking, and Justin will now provide more details on what we have learned so far. Thank you.
Great. So again, although we don't have a design yet for the street, we do acknowledge that achieving the vision that Viola just presented for Highland Ave means less space dedicated to vehicle parking in the future. However, we also know that we can utilize our parking resources much more effectively than we do today, and we can develop strategies to mitigate the impacts of these potential changes. The current parking regulations focus most heavily on longer-term vehicle storage. With more targeted regulations that encourage turnover where it's needed, a single parking space can serve a lot more people than it does today. We strongly believe that Highland Ave needs a parking management strategy that focuses on effective loading zones, spaces for pickup and drop off, side street parking resources, and spaces that provide access for persons with disabilities. This strategy must depend on the hours, types, and operations of the nearby destinations. Some businesses may need longer time limits, while others may be able to serve more potential customers with shorter time limits. So a little illustration of what that looks like. It's really important to understand that the amount of parking turnover, how often new people are parking there, can be, just as, if not more important than the count of the number of spaces. And the number of people that can be served in a single parking space during the daytime varies widely depending on how it's regulated. And the regulations need to be context specific. So here's an example of a number of different parking regulations and how many people that potentially could serve in one day. We have 2-hour parking over on the left, which is in the single digits. We have pickup and drop off over on the right, which is approaching 50 people served per day. This doesn't mean that every space needs to be a pickup and drop off space, but we can pick targeted locations to increase the amount of people we can serve in the same amount of space. We also wanted to understand, parking supply and capacity on Highland Ave, and we identified this study area of about a 2 to 5 minute walk from Highland Ave through the edges of the study area there, and collected all of the parking regulations in those areas using the Court app, and identified really a number of key questions we wanted to answer. So number one, what are the existing conditions? How is parking currently regulated on Highland Ave and in the surrounding neighborhoods? What is the peak overnight parking occupancy on Highland Ave and nearby? And we're going to be talking about that tonight. We also want to know what that looks like during the daytime and how it changes during the day. And we're going to be releasing that information very soon. And then, all this to really answer the question about whether there is capacity in the system to mitigate the impacts of being fewer parking spaces on Highland Ave itself. So existing conditions. Today, within the project area, there's approximately 420 vehicle capacity on Highland Ave itself. The vast majority of that is the 2-hour except by permit, which is 2-hour free parking, and folks with any kind of parking permit, like a resident parking permit, are not subject to that time limit. There's about 5% of loading and pickup drop-off type spaces, even fewer metered parking spaces, and then a very small, just over 1% of accessible parking spaces today. Within, again, that approximately 2 to 5 minute walk, there is space for a little over 3,000 vehicles. Again, the vast majority is now just the permit parking only. And that makes sense because these are mostly residential neighborhoods. There are very, very small amounts of loading, meters, and accessible spaces. There's a little bit of that 2-hour except by permit. And then there's also some private ways, which are also resident parking, but only open to the residents of those streets. So one of the takeaways from this is that the fact that there's no time limits for those with permits at more than 90% of the spaces really limits the turnover and the capacity of those spaces. And parking for folks who may be coming into Somerville, folks that may not have a parking permit visiting our businesses and other destinations is really, really limited in existing conditions because it's very, very likely that a lot of these 2-hour spaces are in fact occupied by folks with permits for much longer periods of time. So we conducted parking counts at 5 a.m. These are peak parking counts. That's the time at which we expect the maximum capacity to be on Highland Ave for the entirety of Highland Ave. We also collected about 75% of the other streets in that study area we showed earlier. All of this is using pretty cautious assumptions. All parking regulations are strictly enforced, so distances from corners, distances from crosswalks, from fire hydrants, from curb cuts, all of that is strictly enforced. Segments of the curb shorter than 18 feet were not included in the analysis, though many of those will in fact fit a vehicle. And then the other 25% of streets in the study area that we did not count were not assumed to have any excess capacity, even though it's likely that at least some of them do. The overall results from that 5 a.m. count were about 83% occupancy on Highland Ave itself, and about 81% within that whole study area, not including Highland Ave. So we counted 347 vehicles on Highland Ave. We counted 73 open spaces at 5 a.m. We counted 2,274 vehicles in the surrounding neighborhoods with about 521 spaces available. And really one of the takeaways there is that the capacity on the nearby streets exceeded the number of vehicles we counted on Highland Ave itself. We also broke that up into smaller areas. So this is just a summary table here. We've got the full study area in the first row, and then 3 sections of that below. So an eastern, a central, and a western section. You can see in the first column the occupancy of each section. And again, that first row is all of the next 3 combined. You can see the number of vehicles counted on Highland, the spaces that were available, occupancy within that surrounding neighborhood of that section, and then spaces available within that walk around that section. And you can see in each case, the spaces available within that short walk exceeded the number of vehicles counted on Highland Ave itself. And I've seen a couple of questions come in. This is not street sweeping conditions. This is a typical condition. And again, these are 5 a.m. peak parking counts. So our main takeaways were that the spaces available exceeded the number of vehicles counted on Highland. One other note is that occupancy is not evenly distributed. It really does vary significantly by block. There are plenty of blocks that are at capacity. There are plenty of blocks that are well below the 80%. The street where you live may look a lot different than others nearby, and the most popular parking areas will always fill up first. Again, this is a snapshot at one point in time representing typical conditions, and we know that there are conditions that are not typical. So in summary, our takeaway, at least for the 5 a.m. count, was that a Highland Ave with less parking would have impacts to overnight parking, but that there is room to mitigate those impacts given the excess capacity in the neighborhood on certain streets. Quick advertisement here. So we weren't able to complete the daytime counts for this meeting, but we are going to be completing the same study during the day as well. We're going to count 4 times on one weekday for, again, most streets in that study area, using the same cautious assumptions, and we'll be sharing those results publicly as well as soon as the analysis is complete. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kate to talk a little bit about our outreach so far.
Thanks, Justin. So hi, everyone. I'm Kate White. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our business surveys and some of our street intercept surveys. So as we know, Highland Ave is home to many small businesses, nonprofits, community organizations, house of worships, learning centers, along with many residents. Before beginning design, this summer our team reached out to local businesses to learn more about their needs on Highland Ave. We were able to collect surveys from 24 businesses where we asked about the types of delivery vehicles they receive, the frequency, estimated times of deliveries, and their delivery parking locations. We also asked about their customer visit habits, their parking preferences, and preferred walking distances. We asked about employee numbers, employee travel modes, parking locations, and preferred walking distances, and about what street amenities they would like to see along Highland Ave. If you're a business owner and we weren't able to participate, we would love for you to participate. So please reach out to us at transportation@SomervilleMA.gov, and we'd be happy to send it along to you, come and conduct it with you, and just have a discussion around your needs and thoughts and concerns. Next slide, please. So here are the list of the 24 businesses that we were able to connect to in this survey. And then I'd love to share some of the results. Next slide, please, Justin. So after compiling the results from the survey businesses, we walked Highland Ave and visited with businesses to share back the results and try and raise awareness about the project. We ended up getting the chance to visit 47 businesses and community organizations, but again, if we didn't get the chance to talk with you, if you'd like to talk more, we'd love to meet. Some of the initial takeaways of this survey were that we found that 57% take deliveries off Highland Ave, and these are primarily in vehicles like box trucks or tractor trailers. Deliveries are most common before noon, but occur all throughout the day. 75% agreed that a 5 or more minute walk was acceptable for people visiting their business, and 29% agreed that a 10 or more minute walk was acceptable. 54% agreed that a 5 or more minute walk was acceptable for employees, and 38% agreed that a 10 or more minute walk was acceptable for employees. Our top 3 most requested amenities were art, trees and greenery, and outdoor seating. And again, I just want to reiterate that we know this is an exhaustive list and we'd love to hear from you and do the survey with you. Justin, next slide, please. We also got the chance to conduct some street intercept surveys with people visiting destinations along Highland Ave. Intercept surveys are where we ask people on the street about their travel preferences and their shopping habits. We asked most of these at the major cross sections on Highland Ave, and these are displayed here in this map and as you can see with the green marker, but really at our major cross streets, Flow, Central, Cedar. We were able to collect 82 total surveys and through in-person conversations with people visiting shops, restaurants, and services. This is not a scientific survey, but really is just intended to provide context by asking a random sample of general public and providing a snapshot of habits. Again, just trying to learn some of the patterns along the street. Justin, next slide. So some takeaways from these were that we found that 65% of people arrived by walking, biking, or taking the bus, with 56% walking to the business. While 35% drove, only 22% indicated driving as their preferred travel mode to Highland Ave. 5% biked, but 14% indicated that they would prefer to bike if it was safer and more comfortable. And 71% indicated that a 5 or more minute walk was acceptable to reach a business. And 44% indicated a 10 or more minute walk was acceptable. Justin, next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some next steps. We are still in listening mode. I really want to stress that this evening. Conceptual design has not yet started in the project, and we will continue to collect input. We want to hear your input on the vision for Highland Ave and the information presented tonight. What did we miss? Who else should we be talking to? How can parking and curb use be better managed on Highland Ave? What is important for transit, pedestrian, and bike facilities? There'll be many opportunities to give input. We launched our public input map today. This is open until January 14th, and we'll be also launching an online public survey, which will email out to attendees, to organizations, businesses, and people along Highland Ave, and also can be conducting some in-person surveying. Please invite us to your meetings and gatherings to help us gather input and answer questions, and we'll also host another community meeting in the spring. We'll be posting all the information on our project website, and you can find this at SomervilleMA.gov/HighlandAve. And at any point, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at transportation@SomervilleMA.gov. So we're now going to be moving into the questions and comments. Thank you so much for all your input into the chat. We are going to focus on answering questions first that have come in during the presentation, but we're making sure to log all comments. Similar questions might be grouped together to allow us to answer as many as possible. And as we discussed in the top of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for an out loud Q&A, so we can hear, you can speak additional questions or comments. I'm just going to reiterate the Zoom instructions, just in case if anyone needs them. To participate, you can, again, input your questions into the chat. We're going to continue to monitor them. You can raise your hand if you want to have an out loud comment, but again, we're going to address some of the written questions first. To do that, you can press the raise hand button. And as I mentioned before, it might be in your reactions button on your toolbar, directly on your toolbar, or in your participants window. And then we'll then call on you when it's your turn and unmute your microphone. We'll also make sure to share kind of an estimate of how many raised hands we have so that you know kind of where you are in the queue. And if you are joining by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And if you have additional questions or you need some time to think about it or want to share your comment just directly with us, again, just email us. So with that, we'll open it up for questions and comments. So I'm going to start off with some of the ones we received at the top. So I think we have some questions around parking near Somerville High School area and some of the plans for that. That is separate from this project. So the question, is this part of the Highland Ave project? And team, would anyone like to start us off?
Sure, I can start us off. That's not part of this project. Again, the changes for this project construction, we're talking about late in 2023. I think what this questioner is referring to is a proposal headed to the Traffic Commission tomorrow night to dedicate certain spaces along Highland and some of the side streets to folks with school or city hall permits during the morning hours. And again, folks, the Traffic Commission is going to meet on that tomorrow night. You can find more information about that on their website, including how to join that meeting, or by emailing trafficcommission@SomervilleMA.gov. You can submit comments. And the intent there is, in the existing conditions, folks with city hall and school permits park really in any permit parking areas. And the goal with designating some of the spaces along Highland Ave in front of the new campus itself is to try to take some of the pressure off some of the side streets, the opposite side of Highland Ave, and provide a space where teachers can find a space that need it most early in the morning. So that's not part of this project, but that's a good question. And again, the Traffic Commission is going to be hearing that tomorrow evening.
Thanks, Justin. So I think we have some questions coming in about parking. I think we had one about clarification of the percentage of parking spots on Highland Ave that will be lost.
Great question. We don't have an answer to that today. Again, we don't have a design today. We have a vision, and we know with all the things that people want to see on the street, just in the physical space we have on the street, that means parking being located on one side rather than on both sides. And I think with each project, we're trying to improve on how we provide parking. So doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be on one specific side versus the other side. Like, that's part of why we're here, is to figure out where and when those curbside uses are needed most, and really customizing those parking regulations to match the business needs, the needs of the destinations around Highland Ave. So at this moment today, without starting the conceptual design, we don't have an answer to that question, unfortunately, but that's definitely information that will be shared.
Okay, great. So another one is why are we doing a design that impacts parking before the citywide comprehensive parking plan is completed?
Yeah, I think there actually is some nice alignment between these two projects, because we will have recommendations coming out of the citywide parking study next spring. We will still just have started the design on Highland Ave, so there's definitely an opportunity to incorporate the lessons learned and the input from that project into this project. So I think the fact that they're working in tandem could potentially be a benefit here.
Thanks, Justin. So is there a possibility of adding off-street lots?
Kate, I'll be happy to take a first crack at that, and other folks can chime in as needed. One of the things that the city has looked into over the last few years is opportunities to engage in public-private partnerships, leasing or purchasing land for additional off-street parking. to date, those efforts have been unsuccessful. We put out a couple of RFPs a couple of years ago, and we're not able to get any favorable responses. So, we do have a big picture approach to these issues, and we'll work to leave no stone unturned. So thank you for the suggestion, and know that we're working on these issues.
Great. So our next question is some kind of more detailed questions on the parking data. So could we just talk more about when was the data about parking collected? When were the counts done? Are they normalized, or do they take into account street cleaning schedules? And what is the date of this parking study? And some clarification on why those 5 a.m. counts were conducted at that time.
Yeah, so the counts were collected using resources from the citywide parking study, and the 5 a.m. count is the recommended time to capture that peak overnight parking count. So folks were out there on the street counting cars in that full study area. Because it's so large, we can't collect all of the data at once. The vast majority of this data was collected over the month of October. And they were collected during typical conditions, by which we mean not the 2 nights a month in most of the neighborhood streets, or the 1 night a week on Highland Ave where there's street sweeping. In fact, generally speaking, in other studies, we find that, for example, there was a comprehensive study done around the high school, and when there was street sweeping on Highland Ave, the capacity really did not change all that much on the side streets. Now, on your specific street, when there's street sweeping, certainly the capacity changes, but at a neighborhood level, we found that that doesn't impact the occupancy as much as we expected, likely because it's not a closed system and folks can move out to other areas. All street sweeping doesn't happen on all the streets at the same time. So again, we wanted to collect the sort of typical conditions, the 28 days a month, the peak count, but certainly there are conditions that change. There's street sweeping, there are snow emergencies, there are large events at the high school, and we're going to be working on strategies how to address those events as well.
Great, thank you so much. And so someone shared that they transport persons with disabilities and need to drop off very close to destinations and then park very nearby. Could you describe a little bit how that will work?
Yeah, I think one of the real central curbside management goals here is to provide space for persons with disabilities and figure out ways to prioritize a limited parking resource for those that need it most. What we have right now is essentially a first come, first serve, free for all in many respects. So parking and curbside uses for persons with disabilities, whether that's accessible pickup and drop off zones, whether that's accessible parking spaces, will be included in this project.
I have another question about parking. How would seniors and I think caretakers be able to park, contractors, service people, and guest parking?
Yeah,
Justin, would you like me to chime in first? I think it's important to note that the city's parking department administers a variety of permit types, which include home health care assistants, which include contractors, temporary construction. Business owners have the ability to work with our parking department to ensure that local business employees have the ability to park on specific streets. And so I think this illustrates one possible series of options for us going forward is to, again, as Justin said a moment ago, trying to make better use of the existing curbside space to serve those special user groups, which really do have generally have very specific and legitimate needs for curbside access on Highland Avenue. But Justin, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was going to say exactly that. Those are user groups that there is permit parking that is offered by the parking department.
Great, so I have a land use question. So someone asked about the houses that are over 100 years old on Highland. Are there issues around if the foundations will shift with some of this work?
I can.
Dan Amelin, can I call on you to talk a little bit about your experience managing big impactful construction in our Union Square neighborhood?
Yes, absolutely. You beat me to it, Brett. So the quick answer to that is typically what we do for any city project with this type of heavy civil work. we incorporate a specification that requires our contractor to basically perform structure monitoring and inspection. So what that entails is typically the city will provide a notice to an individual homeowner. 2 weeks later, a contractor will arrive to perform the inspection under the supervision of either a registered architect or a professional structural engineer. The purpose of this is I'll call it a pre-construction inspection. And through video and photograph, they walk through the building, recording as much information as they can. And then when construction is complete, they'll come back to perform a post-construction inspection to see if there's been any changes to the structure itself throughout the construction duration. Typically, assuming there is some sort of damage, so it could be the foundation, could be a sewer lateral, could be a number of things. If that is recorded as a different condition when the pre-inspection was performed, the contractor is then required to make all the necessary repairs during the post-inspection, so that whatever damage occurs is rectified immediately by our contractor before their contract expires.
Thanks, Dan. And while we're on some of the questions around the sewer work, we have a question about the specific timeline of the sewer project on Highland. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'll do my best. As we've mentioned, since we don't have a design yet, we are years away from actual construction work. Typically, all the underground work, sewer predominantly, is one of the first things that happens. Obviously, you can't construct the streetscape until all the underground work is done. So unfortunately, at this time, I don't have a better answer until we get through the design, get into the construction phase, and understand what the schedule is that our contractor is responsible for.
Dan, I would like to interject a little bit on that, because what we do know is that part of the sewer reconstruction is in the Spring Hill project in Highland Ave. So the section between Central and School Street is in the Spring Hill construction project. So that will be moving forward. And this project would come in after that to do the streetscape there. The sewer for the remainder of Highland would be part of this project.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian and Dan, and thanks everyone again for bearing with us as we work through all the questions. We had another one around utilities. Will the gas line upgrade be done separately?
I can answer this one.
Sure.
So every year we share with the gas companies our list of upcoming construction projects for the next few years. And so this is already on that list to allow the gas companies to, and other utility companies that are private, to prepare their capital improvement and maintenance plans so that they can do work before we do final paving. So over the next few years, we will be coordinating with private utilities like we do with all streets that are under construction or repaving.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to pivot to some questions on bike lanes. So one question we had is, for safer biking conditions, could people use the bike path that's about a block away from Highland Ave?
Hilda, if it's okay, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about our citywide bike network planning efforts and some of the other projects that we've been working on with community process and on the ground change.
Sure. The question is a good question. It has been asked by our committees and even after the last public meeting. One of the challenges is that the community path is downhill. So people are concerned about the slope and how to get up to Highland Avenue. And it's a long stretch. If you start at Davis Square and you want to go to the high school, you might not want to go down the hill and then up the hill. That said, as Brad just mentioned, we are working on a bicycle network plan where we will look at all these issues and hopefully come up with a network that will suit many people with different needs. Some might want the faster, connection on Highland, others might be fine going up and down the slope. But because of the hilly condition and Highland Avenue being on top of it all, we do want protected and need protected bike lanes on Highland Avenue. The community path is not going to be a valid alternative over the 24 hours or, business hours that Highland Avenue wants to be used.
So we got a question that asks, are there lessons from the recent Somerville Ave project that will be incorporated into Highland Ave?
Okay, why don't I take a first answer and then invite people like Brian and Dan to chime in as well. I think the heart of the question was, how is the city growing our capacity to manage big construction while minimizing hardship on residents, on business owners, workers, commuters, et cetera? And I think we have learned a lot as an organization over the last 5 or 6 years because we have been dealing with generations worth of infrastructure upgrades that all seem to be coming together at once. School buildings, libraries, sewer pipes, gas lines, streets, and parks as well, right? We have been building staff team and bringing more and more outreach specialists, public information specialists in several different departments. We are recruiting people who are multilingual. We are recruiting more people whose jobs is to be on the street, pounding the pavement, talking to people in businesses, in the faith community, and our local nonprofit partners to complement all the teams that are working behind the scenes at desks. Dan, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience with Jesse Moose, not only on the ground, but all of the customer service follow-up and conflict detection, what you folks do around the clock for 4 years of Somerville Avenue again.
Sure, thank you, Brad. Yeah, in managing Somerville Ave project for the last 3.5 years or so, there's certainly quite a few lessons learned. Brad, I think first and foremost, you hit the nail on the head. Outreach and getting information to residents and abutters is one of the biggest lessons that we're carrying forward into Highland Ave. And as Brad mentioned, being able to have staff on our end that is multilingual and able to communicate with those whose first language may not be English is really a necessary point that we have to strive for and continue, our efforts and improve our efforts so that, anyone who's impacted by these types of projects is fully aware of, what the scope is, what the impacts are, what's the schedule and timeline, and how does that impact their life. And I think looking at some of the actual engineering work, seeing the success we've had with our green infrastructure installation on Somerville Ave, that's something we've carried forward to the Spring Hill project. That's something that we'll carry forward into this Highland Ave project and hopefully expand what we've done to date. And in addition, coordinating with the MBTA, some of these utility companies, so that, should utilities or bus stops be updated, consolidated, revised, all of this can get done within the same time frame as the project so that we're not coming back post-completion to essentially interrupt the neighborhood any further while we're already out there. So if there's more questions on that, I don't want to spend too much time knowing we've got a lot more questions, but plenty more lessons learned I can share with whomever's interested.
No, that's perfect, Dan. Thank you. And again, our project manager positions, like the Somerville Avenue sewer separation, were created as a full-time equivalent staff position to manage that project. And I also want to point out that we did the same for the Green Line extension. And many folks who participate in our processes have acknowledged that we can and should do better with all forms of outreach and engagement. So the mayor requested and the city council approved an outreach coordinator position that is now held by Kate on this call. So again, we are listening and we are working to make sure that the human resources side of our organization can match up with the impacts and the opportunities of renewing our infrastructure and rebuilding the systems of the city.
Thanks, Brad. So we got a couple questions just on availability of the presentation and that some people might have to hop off soon. So I just want to reiterate that this presentation, both the recording and the slides, will be available on the project website, and the recording will also be on the city's YouTube page. And so you're welcome to refer to that afterwards. Just wanted to reiterate that in case anyone needed that before they hopped off. So I'm gonna bring up some of the business information or business questions. And so one question we got is, have you contacted daycare centers along Highland Ave? We've been definitely trying to get out with flyers and things like that, but we know, again, this is the very beginning of the process and we want to come and meet with you. So we'd be happy to come. And again, we're going to continue to be block walking, reaching out directly to, everywhere, the businesses, the daycare centers, the nonprofit organizations, the houses of worship. And again, we'll stop by, we'll email, we'll call. We'd really love to talk with you. So one question we got is the scope of the project limited to road use, or are aesthetics such as better lighting in the scope too?
I'm happy to answer that. And I'm happy to say, yes, of course, aesthetics is an important factor, and lighting is part of the scope of all of the streetscape improvements in the Spring Hill project, Spring Hill Sewer Improvement Project. All the streets, all the roads that are receiving streetscape improvements. So Highland Avenue is part of that, yes.
And just to underline that, I know rightfully so, there's a lot of focus tonight on bike lanes and parking and other facilities, but we are talking about a complete reconstruction of the street. So brand new sidewalks, brand new street amenities. I see some folks are also asking about bike parking, and that would definitely be a part of the plan. So a completely new street, sort of like if anyone has been down to Union Square and Somerville Ave between McGrath Highway and Prospect Street. Just wanted to highlight that as well.
Yeah, and I want to just add that also all the sidewalks will be ADA compliant after this project is finished.
So I think, because I want to make sure we have time for out loud comment, I want to ask this last written question, but again, if we didn't answer your question, we really want to make sure we'll get back to everyone, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we're logging all of this as we work through and start to develop. The last question from the written chat before we move to open mic will be, who will make a final decision on the plan, and how will the interests of all the different stakeholders that we know who use and live and work on Highland Ave, how will we kind of balance all of these different needs and interests?
So Kate, why don't I take a first answer at that and then ask others, even including our counselors, to chime in as needed. So as we've mentioned, this is the beginning of our process. We've been out in the community, pounding the pavement, flyering, trying to engage folks, and recognizing that's just chapter one of a long story. At this time, we do not have a designer. We do not have an engineering firm to work on the civil engineering drawings that would be needed to actually advance all of the utility work for most of the project. So the first checkpoint is to ask the council to approve spending for us to go get engineering consultants to support our in-house team. Then secondly, we would continue the community process. We would work to build as much consensus as possible, as we do with all of our projects. And then once we reach enough consensus, then we can have a final design and a final cost estimate. And once again, go back to our legislative body, the city council, to seek construction financing. So when you think about some of these big capital projects, East Broadway in East Somerville, which was built between about 2012 and 2015, Somerville Avenue between Porter Square and Union Square, built between 2008 and 2011. More recently, Beacon Street, Somerville Ave and Union Square. All of these projects tend to have a several-year-long life cycle for community engagement, for the actual technical design work before shovels hit the ground. And there are a variety of checks and balances to make sure that we are doing our job, maximizing participation in the community and balancing as many competing needs as possible. So I hope that's a helpful answer about that, kind of couple, 3 years ahead of us.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So again, everyone, we're moving into your opportunity to ask questions out loud. We currently have 15 people with raised hands. I'm going to go in the order that they were raised. And so again, we'll unmute you, and just all you have to press is accept to be unmuted. We just want to remind people that the Our estimated end of the meeting is at 8 p.m. And again, with 22 people with their hands raised, we ask that you be mindful of how much space or time you're taking so we can get to everyone so they can have some time to speak. So we'll start with John Solari.
Hi guys, thank you so much for your time. I live just off of Highland Ave. I lived on Highland Ave for 6 years. I also own and manage over 60 units on Highland Ave. I believe that the removal of any parking along Highland Ave is a bad idea. We have a huge housing crisis in this city. We need more housing. The new zoning requires very little off-street parking. And so when these new buildings are going up, there'll be even less parking than there is now. I think you guys need to look at other avenues to create more parking. And then the second, I've dealt with this team on College Avenue, and I just want to point out that they are incredibly entrenched in the bike community. They meet with the bike committee once a month. I was on the January meeting when they strategized this plan about taking away half the parking, when they really wanted to take away all the parking along Highland Ave. So if you're a business owner, please, come to these meetings, make a point to make comments because they're not listening to us. Thank you for your time.
John, we hear you. Thank you for the comments. We appreciate your time.
So next we'll move to Samantha. And then just so everyone knows who's next, we have Julie, Brett, and then Aaron. Samantha, I'm gonna unmute you now.
Hi, we're just wondering about, I think you guys said that we're gonna lose out on 50% of the parking spots, but even when the data was taken for 5 a.m., I think it said that only 15% of spots were available. So if you're getting rid of 50% of spots, where are those people going to park if that's not even available now?
Thanks, Samantha. Justin, can I call on you to answer that question?
Yeah, so we were looking at both. Oh, first, I just want to clarify, we don't know the exact number of spaces today that will be removed. We just based on the vision, it means most likely parking on one side of the street. And we looked at not just Highland Ave, but a study area of a couple minutes walk away from Highland Ave. So part of the intent there showing that approximately, I think it was 81% or so on Highland and 83% in the surrounding neighborhoods is to show that we have some excess capacity on side streets that are nearby Highland Avenue. And just in terms of the more direct question, where will people park? I think it is worth noting that we already have the situation on Highland Ave where approximately 50% of parking goes away twice a week for street sweeping. So in some ways, that's a little bit of an experiment for what it would look like. And just to clarify, the 80% numbers were on Highland Ave, but also in the neighborhood. We're in the 2 to 5 minute walk away from Highland Ave.
Okay, next we'll have Julie Pilato.
I'm not sure that I had planned on speaking, but I've lived in Somerville 40 plus years. I just want to note that my parents own a home here. We're right by the school and all the construction. We're happy with improvements, but I do think that everyone does need to be taken into consideration, and I'm not sure where seniors are being taken into consideration, or
health aides,
or people who are coming in, or like home health aides actually, who come in to take care of the seniors, or any such number of folks. So I really am concerned with any plan that takes away parking, because parking is precious in Somerville, and I do feel like that's a mistake. So that's all I wanted to say.
Julie, thanks for your comments. We hear you, and we are working with our local council on aging, with our city councilors, and with community leaders and average residents like you. So because we're at the beginning of the process, We're really hoping to capture that type of comment and do appropriate follow-up with stakeholders in the neighborhoods. So I look forward to having that conversation in more detail with you and with others.
So next we'll move to Brett Solari, and after that we have Aaron, Peyton, and Stephanie.
Good evening. Thank you guys for your time. To start, I think that you guys probably should, I think an improvement to the sewer system is a wonderful idea. I think you guys should do a winter study with your parking, because I live next to the Armory and I can't find parking with everything. Secondly, it would be wonderful if we didn't get rid of any parking, because as a Highland Ave resident, I'll be directly affected. I've been here for 7 years. It's a disaster trying to find parking here. So to remove parking halfway is a mistake, and this is going to be a catastrophe long-term for the businesses and everyone else. On community outreach, I spent about 30 hours reaching out to all the businesses on Highland Ave. I'm a resident. I didn't even know about it. I didn't know about this at all. You guys really need to step it up. I called Brad multiple times. He did not call me back. I feel that this is a mistake waiting to happen. And I know you guys are trying to push an initiative to get rid of parking and make it as green as possible, but I think you guys are going to deeply affect businesses, commerce, and values of property for people. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, some compromises are worthwhile, but getting rid of half the parking, over 140 spots, and that's ridiculous. And the fact that you guys didn't notify owners of properties by certified mail, if anyone does a project in the city, they all have to notify their butters by certified mail. The amount of money we pay in taxes, you guys should be notifying every single property owner on Highland Ave, all 378 of them. All right, that's what I got for you. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to our meeting, Kate, later.
Brett, thanks for your time and thanks for your comments. And I'm glad that you and Kate were able to connect and arrange for those follow-up conversations. So again, look forward to the continuing engagement since we're at the beginning of this process.
Brad.
So next we have Aaron.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for this informative meeting and for taking this data and community-focused approach to this project. You know that change is hard and it brings up a lot of emotions, but we also know that often in these projects, the disasters that are predicted do not come to pass. And I appreciate you've listened to concerns and are coming back today with clear goals that make this road safe for all. I just want to extend a special thank you to all the elected officials and city employees on this project. You've done a lot on this and it really shows. And I really look forward to be able to safely bike down Highland Ave soon, something that I really can't do now. So I look forward to that. And for all the other residents in our city, this road will actually be safe for us. One question I have is just if you've done any studying or thinking on how the Green Line extension will affect the project with more people taking transit to get to this area rather than using vehicles, and also how an increase in safe bikeways will allow more people to move this road a different way, therefore decreasing potential demand for personal vehicle use. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the comments and questions. Yeah, Viola, Justin, please feel free to chime in on the impacts of Green Line and this, again, that citywide bike network plan that we've been working on.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, for that question. I mean, we all expect that the Green Line will make a big change in how people in Somerville commute. So what the actual numbers will be, obviously, we will see when the Green Line is starting. But I have to refer back to the bicycle network plan. I mean, that is one of the things we will be looking intensely at, is how do people then from the stations can make it into the neighborhood and including Highland Avenue. So the better those connections are, the more people will change their mode of transportation. So we have the Green Line hugely in mind when we look at that, and hope that that will have a long-term effect on all modes.
Yeah, I would just add that if any folks attended the parking study meeting last week, you would note that one of the areas of the city where the fewest resident parking permits are around Davis Square, where we have rapid transit. It's also one of the areas of the city that has the lowest amount of car ownership. So again, we don't know exact numbers today, but certainly there's a potential for fewer people to own and park vehicles. There's the potential for folks to go from a 2-car family to a 1-car family. You know, all these things are not going to happen overnight. They're going to take time, but certainly the fact that the Green Line extension will be open before this project enters construction means that there's really a lot of potential there.
And Justin, a couple quick additional thoughts on the Green Line. The consultant and staff and community team that you've been working with on this citywide curb use study is focusing on a couple of neighborhoods around future Green Line stations. So we'll have the same type of data collected as we've described here on Highland Avenue, and there will be more opportunities to evaluate that kind of baseline pre-Green Line curb use, and then repeat those studies after the service opens next year, right?
Yep, that's right, Brad.
Excellent.
So I just want to let everyone know we have 20 hands raised. So again, we're going to try and get to as many as possible. We're coming up to the 8 o'clock marker and we can go past, but again, we really want to make sure to respect everyone's time. So our next 3 will be Peyton, Stephanie, and Michael. Peyton, I'm going to unmute you now.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thanks everyone for putting this meeting on tonight. I know it's not easy, especially during these times. But what I'm curious, one of the many things I'm curious about is how you're planning to handle parking for commercial vehicles along the Highland Ave corridor. If we're looking, when we look at something like Beacon Street, there's like absolutely nowhere for delivery or logistic vehicles to park along Beacon Street. You know, in a pie in the sky world, it's perfect, but in reality, there's nowhere for whether it's USPS or UPS or whatever the logistic companies are to park. And what we end up with is, excuse the term, but you end up with people having to park wherever they can, and Karens taking pictures of, you know, hardworking folks trying to do their jobs and tweet, whether it's tweeting at the companies or emailing them at the companies and trying to get, whether it's people fired or people disciplined for you know, for doing their jobs. And these companies don't care because it's, you know, we live in a capitalist society. So all these companies care about is just getting their product out there, and all the residents care about is getting their products that they order through e-commerce. So, you know, I'm just curious, what are the plans for where are, you know, all these delivery vehicles or Ubers or Lyfts or wherever going to park as they wait to pick folks up? If there's bike lanes on either side or on one side. And the answer to, if anyone's going to say there's going to be commercial zones where those folks can park without highly regulated commercial zones, that doesn't work, because if you're driving down a street and someone's parked for 5 minutes, a truck has to drive all the way to Davis Square, all the way to McGrath Highway to turn around to come back to find an open space to park. So anyways, I don't want to waste any more time, but thank you.
Peyton, thanks for those questions. You're totally right. Evaluating those commercial loading uses are a super important part of the project at this stage. And in retrospect, you know, previous projects like a Beacon Street, those types of questions could have been better asked at the time of design. And we're continuing to work to try to manage this stuff citywide. Justin, can you talk a little bit about the scope and the conversations you've been having with our parking task force, our staff and consultant team, to try to address a really logical and useful way for all of those logistics uses and curbside access citywide, not just on Highland Avenue?
Yeah, you know, a real comprehensive parking management plan is definitely part of this project. And because we're in the data collection mode right now, I can't say when or where those spaces will be, but it's absolutely our intent to provide expanded spaces for commercial loading and other activities like that. And, you know, like Brad mentioned, I think we're learning lessons from past projects. We don't necessarily need to have it just on one side of the street. We can place it when and where it's needed. We can fine tune the parking regulations so that these activities happen where they're most needed. For example, in Davis Square, we have parking meters that are commercial loading in the morning and then parking meters the rest of the day. think those are the kinds of sort of fine-tuned policies that we need to develop. And then, yes, of course, enforcement as well. You're right that it will not work without effective enforcement. We've seen experiments in other cities with folks being able to book commercial loading spaces. Potentially, that's something that could be employed on Highland Ave. The app that we use to collect all this parking data, Core, they actually support that booking process. So again, we're collecting information now, but a strategy for commercial loading is certainly part of that. And I think the sort of hypothesis that we're putting forward tonight is that we need to shift, especially in front of our businesses, shifting away from longer term parking uses to more short term uses.
So next we have Stephanie, and after that we have Michael, Charles, and John.
Hi, thanks for having me. I live on Morrison. I have biked on Highland in the past, but I stopped after I had a pretty scary experience last year with a reckless driver. I haven't been back to Highland Kitchen for takeout since that happened, and I feel like that's a loss for me as a local resident. The message that I get from the streetscape right now is that if I want to go to businesses on Highland, I should either risk my safety or drive and park. But at the same time, I'm getting the message that there's too much parking demand. A streetscape that only prioritizes cars is reinforcing its own problems. I think it's time to try something different. Let's go for safety. Let's go for more access for all different types of modes. It doesn't just have to be for cars. Cars should be part of it. There should be accessible parking spaces, but everybody should have a chance to get to Highland, not just drivers. Thank you.
Thanks for the comment, Stephanie.
Next we have Michael. Michael, would you like to share your comment? Oh, if we don't hear from Michael, we'll move on to Charles Calania.
Yeah. Everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Charles.
Great. I'm Charles Calania, and I represent your local veterinarian on Highland Ave. And we've been around for the better part of 20, 25 years, actually, throughout Boston for about 100. So we've seen it all. And one of the unique things that we deal with is because we are one of your few veterinary practices in the entire town. And as you're very much aware that it's one of the most densely populated cities in America. Some of the unique parking issues that we run into is that folks have to, for the most part, drive to us, whether they be elderly or they have ADA issues and they're bringing pets with them, and we're dealing with everything from emergencies to routine visits. And so parking becomes very, very important for us and our staff to be able to service those folks. And as you know, we draw, and you may not know this, but we draw from 5 miles out. So we drag everybody in from Somerville everywhere, and even so some of the surrounding areas. So this is why some of these issues, and at this point where everybody has a fuzzy family member at home, and these in some cases definitely become life and limb issues, and God forbid you get hit by a car when somebody has to get to us, and they have to get to us fast, and they have to be able to park there. That's generally, I just wish you guys, when you go through this, is one of the things, and obviously we're very unique, but we also one of the very few services in Somerville that provide this type of care. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And again, thanks for your time tonight, and duly noted. We look forward to following up with you and your team and your customers as well. Kate, I think Michael did try to unmute there, so you might want to give him another chance before you move down the queue.
Yeah, sure thing.
Thank you, Bonnie. I am here. When in Davis Square, the experience has been that while people are taking the T, we also have an influx of people driving to Davis Square, parking their cars because they have parking permits and then taking the T. will that happen when the green line opens up for us and then put more strain on those areas that are close to the various stations that are parallel to Highland? That's one of the areas where maybe, so well, Somerville people have the right to park anywhere in the city, so it would put more strain on there. Maybe extending bus lines like the Spring Hill bus to go continue on Central, come down Medford, and then come back up through Gilman Square would be a way to go ahead and get our first real cross-city bus line. Maybe even going as far as Broadway, that's a possibility. But those are things that might be solutions. Thank you.
Michael, thanks for those comments. Justin, would you mind talking a little bit again about that citywide parking study and the way that our working group has been starting to think about issues like Michael described, whether it's Sullivan in East Somerville or Davis and Porter in West Somerville? We certainly understand that anybody with a Somerville resident parking permit can get down to Mount Vernon Street near Sullivan or get to Wallace Street near Davis, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a conversation that you've all been able to begin or at this point?
Yeah, again, I apologize, we don't have answers tonight, but the question of what to do in transit areas with permanent parking is built into the scope of the citywide parking study. And there's a lot of folks that have different uses for resident permits. Folks use it to park in the street in front of their house. A lot of folks that have off-street parking use it to park in other areas of the city. So the question of whether there should be parking zones, whether there should be transit area parking zones, these are all things that are going to be under consideration. And we recognize that there are folks that do use the permit parking, in those areas to leave their cars and ride the train. And I think that's maybe one more reason why, particularly on Highland Ave, more short-term parking would be beneficial to the businesses on Highland Ave.
Thanks, Justin. And just quickly to the second part of Michael's question, because we haven't really talked about it in a lot of detail yet. I'm glad you spotlighted the bus transit issue, and I see that there have been a few comments in the chat tonight. We've talked a couple of times about our citywide curb use plan and a couple of times about our citywide bike network plan. We are also working on a citywide bus network plan, and that process will plug into the formal, like once in a generation piece of work that the MBTA is doing to try to repaint the canvas of regional bus lines. Most of the bus lines around the region are products of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, a time of very, very different demographics, economics, mobility choices. And to their credit, the MBTA is really thinking about kind of a blank slate and serving communities that really need to continue to be served, but looking for opportunities to optimize other bus services. Michael, to your point about north-south, that is a theme we hear constantly from our residents, and we constantly advocate with our partners at MBTA. So to make sure that Winter Hill residents can have a one-seat ride to the job centers, cultural centers of Union Square, Kendall Central. North-south connectivity is super, super important. And I'm glad you bring that up because I think it's really relevant to the Highland Avenue mobility conversation.
Thanks, Brad. So folks, just doing a quick time check. It's 8:04. We have 24 hand raises. So we're trying to get to as many people as possible. Next, we'll have John, then Cypress, then Lindsay.
Hi, this is John Wild. You can hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I've lived on Highland Avenue for over 20 years. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I think it's really exciting and a great opportunity. Couple of things that might not have been mentioned much are the existing street trees. I think the new design should incorporate the existing street trees and make sure to improve the growing conditions for added trees and the existing trees. Right now, we have very small tree pits and tough growing conditions. So I would like to see that be incorporated in the plan. I'd like to reiterate on the lighting. Currently, the lighting on Highland Avenue are highway fixtures, tall poles and Cobra head light fixtures. So, and also Highland Avenue is narrower than is Somerville Avenue or Broadway. So really the light fixtures should take that into consideration and be much lower and more pedestrian scaled. The third point that no one has really been thinking or talking about, I should say, is that I think this is an opportunity really to see Highland as a kind of main street for Somerville as it connects the City Hall, concourse, the library, the high school to Davis Square. It's a special avenue right in the middle of Somerville, and I'd like to see it treated as a main street. That wasn't going to say too much more about parking, but one thing is living here for so long, the parking is quite variable at different times of the year, whether it's college students are in town, if it's around the holidays. So I think your parking studies need to be done at various times of the year to see what the true parking counts really are. Thank you.
John, thanks for the comments and taking the time to be with us tonight. Viola, may I ask you to speak a little bit about urban forestry? And John, I want you to know that the city has been investing in an urban forestry team. Our council, our constituents have all been asking for the same things that you just described, more professional capacity to take care of the trees that we have and make sure that when we do new projects, not only are we protecting old growth trees, but setting the new ones up for success with high quality planting specifications. So Viola, you and Dan, I think, can talk a little bit about citywide efforts and maybe even again that Somerville Avenue example.
Yeah, I don't know if I have all the not answers, but know exactly the details of what we do with the trees. But we work very closely with all departments within the city, and the public space and urban forestry department is one. And they review all the plans, and we work with them during the design phase. So they give a big input and feedback on how do we make sure that our street trees are planted in the most healthy way and with the best knowledge as we know it now. And you can see that in the Somerville Avenue project in Union Square. The trees have been planted there with plenty of room for the roots to grow, and we'll hope that they are much healthier. And if we see any issues there, we will take that as a lesson, to go back to the question that we had earlier. Do we learn from projects that we are implementing right now? Yes, we do. We all talk very closely to each other, with each other. And so that is going to be a part of the streetscape design for Highland Avenue.
And Dan, similarly on lighting, right? We were able to replace wall lighting on that project and really pursue that more pedestrian scale look and function that John described with his question and comment.
Yes, exactly, Brad. Somerville Ave, similar situation. About 4 years ago, it was all your highway standard street lights. Those have all since been replaced between Union Square and let's call it Medford Street down by Target. So what we ended up doing once the old poles came down, we took it to the next step, not only by essentially replacing the roadway lights, but we added pedestrian lights. They're about 8 feet tall and they have a double pendant. So it's in terms of illumination, it's pretty close to double what we had previously before this project started. So that's another aspect of what we hope to carry into this Highland Ave project as well.
Thanks, Dan. Now, Kate, out of respect for everybody's time, I'd like to ask how our queue is looking. I would note that it's 8:10, and we really would like to let folks move on with their evenings and know that we will be continuing all of this outreach. Community meetings are only one way that we get feedback. So your time is being valuably invested with us here tonight, but there are going to be a bunch of different ways that we're following up with everybody. So do you mind giving us a little bit of a time check and logistics, Kate?
Yeah, we currently have 20 hand raises. I think we can continue to move through some more, and again, try and get as many as possible. So again, we'll have Cypress, Lindsay, and then Bonnie. Cypress, I'm muting you now.
Thanks, Kate. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I've lived on Highland Avenue and Cutter Avenue for about 7 years. I walk and bike and take public transit. I don't own a car. And I have to say that I'm very excited for the bike infrastructure improvements or any improvements really to pedestrian accessibility that might be coming along. I want to give a shout out to any friends and neighbors in the area who happen to be listening to this conversation, and also a shout out to some of the local businesses. Really like to know Opa Greek Gyros, Zaruma Coffee, Q's Nuts, the Prince Gallery. I patronize them often. are really close by, and I like walking to them. There's some other businesses that I would love to patronize, but they're just a little too far for me and it's uncomfortable to bike on Highland. So for example, I used to have a membership at the YMCA, but I canceled that because it's just too uncomfortable to bike given the current state of the street. Same with Razor's Barbershop, Three Little Figs, Highland Kitchen, Sam's Falafel and Shawarma. I would totally go to all those places more often if Highland Avenue were bikeable. I also wanted to say, do you have any thoughts on traffic calming in general? I've heard a lot about, streetscape improvements, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thanks for the comments. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah,
Do you want me to start on that?
Sure, go ahead, Vil.
So the preliminary design of Highland Avenue had looked at calming quite extensively. And if you go to the webpage and download the presentation from the December meeting, you'll see our diagrams. And we've worked with our consultants at that time to really stress we'd like to see street calming possibly every 300 feet. And those features were at that point mostly crosswalks and race crosswalks if we can. Now that we started to use street bumps more often and feel more comfortable with that, it will probably be a mixture of that. And then including inline bus stops and everything that narrows the street, and possibly crossings that include pedestrian refuge islands, the islands in the middle. So all of these things will be looked at, and we will be fairly aggressive in placing them along Highland Avenue.
So next we'll have Lindsay, and then Bonnie, and then Lauren. Lindsay, I'm unmuting you now.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I live on Highland Avenue in a semi-large apartment building that's in between like the YMCA and Highland Kitchen. And I want to say that parking is an absolute nightmare. And I think that taking away parking spaces is a disastrous idea. So disastrous that the only solution I see for myself if that happens is moving out of Somerville. The quality of life, if you own a car and live on this street and don't have a driveway, is really, really, really difficult. I think that this body has given a lot of lip service to ideas about inclusivity and accessibility, but there is a real implicit ableism going on in this idea of eliminating car use to the extent that the city thinks it should be. That there are many reasons why people can't bike, can't take the bus, certainly can't walk long distances from cars that aren't being considered here. I think there's other blind spots around inclusivity. For example, I think it means something completely different to come home at night and have a 10-minute walk from your car, depending on your gender identity and how safe that feels in a city that aren't being looked at. I want to say that anyone who is suggesting this plan of taking away half of the parking spaces on Somerville for residents could not possibly have a lived experience of what it's like to live in one of the most expensive rental markets in the city, to pay $3,000 a month to rent an apartment, to work a 15-hour day and come home and have to drive around looking for parking for 25 minutes, which is a regular part of living here. Where I live, we already lost 4 parking spaces because of the construction on, I think it was the Vets Hall. I don't know if what they're doing right now is the sewer construction outside my building, but they're taking away around 15 parking spaces. Quality of life and stress levels in our building, it's plummeted. I also just want to say to Justin that I don't think the street cleaning model that you mentioned is a good model, that it's working to have half as much parking. That might look good on paper, but from a lived experience and quality of life perspective, those are the 2 most stressful parts of the week for living here. And the option that the side streets are, those side streets are completely filled too. And I often drive around for a half an hour trying to park. So I hate this idea. That's all I want to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for being here. We appreciate your time and your patience.
So next we have Bonnie, then Lauren, and then Tori. Bonnie, I'm unmuting you now.
Thank you so much for the focus on accessibility
and increasing ADA parking. I really appreciate that. One thing I just want to note though is when we're talking about adding bicycle parking spaces, the city hasn't so far done a very good job of adding accessible parking spaces. And I just want that to be a thing that we put heavy focus on, especially given we've seen in the chat a lot of folks with kids and who are using cargo bikes. And I'd love to see that be something the city pushes for delivery as well. So having space to park those without impacting the sidewalk itself would be really great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate that.
Thank you. So next we'll have Laurent, then Tori, then Alex. Laurent, I'm reading you now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. First of all, I'd like to thank you and your entire team for this fantastic meeting and for listening. I think there's been a variety of perspectives here tonight, and it's really encouraging to see. So I'm speaking as a resident of West Somerville and an advocate for students and families. I've heard from a number of families that they would like to see Somerville streets that their children can ride safely to school in. And in particular, at the high school, these are the age students that, with the centrally located high school, if the streetscape existed where a safe ride could be had by the students, I think we would see large increases in the number of students taking advantage of that and being able to get to and from schools and their places of, after school and after school employment and whatever else they have going on. I think that this project represents a great opportunity to expand and improve the lived experience of the youth of Somerville. So I am excited about the opportunity here. And one thing I would encourage you to do, and I'm curious to hear if you can share your plans for engaging the students, is to hear about your plans for outreach to the high school students, what their planned mobility would be, their transportation options, what their vision for Highland Ave is. And in particular, I would encourage you to hold a, during the school day, event where they could provide feedback to your team directly. So thanks for listening, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Laurent. And I can jump in if you want, Brad. Really appreciate those comments. Again, we really want to get to as many people as possible. We also recognize that we should go where people are. So your suggestion of a meeting at the high school, we actually have some meetings coming up with some of the high school clubs we've connected with, but our goal is to try and connect with as many people who use Highland Ave as possible. So agree, we're definitely trying to work on engaging students, to engaging anyone that uses the street, and going both doing online opportunities, but also in-person opportunities. And then again, staying safe. So we're still practicing all the safe protocols.
Thank you, Kate. So folks, it's now 8:20. So we're going to start to limit the number of questions going forward. So Kate, you're probably still sitting at about 15. For those of you who have comments that we're not going to be able to get to tonight, please accept our apologies. We've had a robust chat. This meeting is being video recorded, and we have a robust mailing list, and we look forward to following up with everybody. But so many important issues have been surfaced tonight, so many diverse and distinct perspectives. And yet, to kind of go back to the top, we are all neighbors. We are all invested in the success of this street and everybody who uses it: residents, visitors, business owners, employees, customers, students, educators. The list goes on and on and on. So before folks start dropping off, I just wanted to, again, thank everybody for volunteering your time to participate in our local processes tonight. So Kate, can you give us about 3 questions to take us home, and then we'll look forward to following up with everybody for our next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go with Tori, Alex, and Edward. Tori, I'm unmuting you now.
Hi, so my question is around Eversource and a pilot project they are doing to bring geothermal energy to people's homes. And one of the potential locations that they're looking into is on Highland Ave from 101 Highland, I think is to 138. And I was just wondering, where the status of that is. Several members of the climate community wrote letters in favor of having this location be the pilot project. And our Councilor Ewen-Campen wrote in favor of this as well. So I was just wondering where the city is at with Eversource and what kind of conversations we're having around this potential pilot project.
Brian, is that a question that you can answer to Tori's question? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tori. That's a great question. We've been chatting with Eversource lately on that particular project. They haven't made a final decision that they've shared with us yet, but as soon as they do, we will share it with the community. I know there's a number of organizations that are really interested in that. Even if they don't end up locating it here, we do have communications with them that they will be sharing their results with us. So if there's a future opportunity here, we'll be able to learn from their pilot tests if they're located elsewhere.
Thanks, Brian. So again, we're going to try and wrap it up with 2 more questions. We'll go Alex and then Edward. Alex, I'm unmuting you now.
Okay, thank you. Holding my baby here, and then I've got my 6-year-old in the other room. So I live right off Highland Ave and Hancock Street. The back of my house looks out on Highland Ave. Lived here 6 years, 13 years in Somerville. And I'm really excited about this project. I feel like we have 2 kids. We intentionally have no cars in our household, and we were in a 2-family house, so there's just 1 car for the whole house in the other unit. But right now, Highland Ave is probably the weakest link in our ability to get around Somerville. And as my kids get older, I really want them to be able to independently go places like events at the Armory or to the high school or to other, or to Davis. And there are just enough places where walking is not going to work. The bus, as people pointed out, is infrequent enough. Maybe it can become more frequent if we have faster bus service on Highland Ave on the 88. The T can run buses more frequently. That would be amazing, so that there are just more choices. So I'm really excited about there just being more choices for safe, independent family transportation in Somerville, not forcing us to to have to drive someplace to feel safe and comfortable. So thank you so much, and I look forward to keeping close tabs on this project as a longtime resident who plans to raise his family here. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. We'll go to Tori.
Kate, I think we actually just came from Tori. The hand was still raised. I think.
Oh, my apologies.
I think Edward's up, right?
Thank you. Ed, please go ahead.
Hi.
Or Edward.
Hello. Thank you, city staff, for running this great meeting. It certainly takes a lot. It's clear you guys have put a lot of thought into it. Thank you, and thanks to everybody for their participation. I think it's been really nice to see everybody listening to each other. I think I was in tone with the spirit of the intro we got. So thanks, everybody. I just want to say, I think we often underappreciate how much independence gets lost by people in our community, both seniors and children, when they can't move around the city independently just because they can't drive themselves. And the sheer number of hours spent by stressed out parents who feel like they have to play chauffeur just to keep their kids safe because their kids can't get places unsupervised. How many folks who've lived in Somerville for decades tell stories about their own childhood of being able to do that when cars were smaller, when there was less traffic. I really want to see us become that city again. And just it's almost incalculable what a quality of life improvement that would mean for families and seniors in Somerville when they feel like they can actually move about the streets and not get run over. So we need streets that work for everyone from age 6 to 106. We need plenty of space for pedestrians. We need plenty of space for street trees with our warming climate. And we need dedicated space where it's safe and comfortable enough that people who are not willing to go out in a mobility scooter, power chair, tricycle, adult-sized tricycle, all those things are hugely beneficial and hugely liberating, and we just don't have the place for them right now. So this is about asking folks to empathize and see that for so long we've been giving so much space just to one way of getting around. You know, Highland Ave is a 4-lane road, right? 4 lanes just for parking and moving cars, and the margins for everything else, all the other aspects of a city's life. So I'm really encouraging everybody to think about how we can share more equitably that space. It's not about getting rid of anybody from that space. It's about sharing that space in a more equal way. So thank you all.
Thanks for those comments, Edward. So Kate, if you don't mind, let's just reinforce for everybody our next steps and the ways to get in touch with us. You have a series of specific engagement meetings, one-on-one with small groups, with consortiums of stakeholders. I want to take my hat off to the business community that has been doing a whole bunch of volunteer organizing. Folks like Christine, Brett, many others, thank you for your activism. Your work is helpful for us, and we look forward to having follow-up conversations with all of you. Folks in the schools community, folks in the nonprofit and the senior advocacy community, we look forward to those one-on-one conversations, small groups and larger focus groups. We're at the beginning of the process. I want to give a shout out to our city councilors who have been here throughout this 2-hour meeting, and yet they also had literally 3 or 4 other places they could have been. So Lance, Mark, Ben, thank you so much. Jesse, Kristen, thank you so much. To our councilors-elect, thank you for taking your time, Jake, Bea, and others. Folks, we're at the beginning and we're all in this together. You can reach us at transportation@SomervilleMA.gov. We have a city website called Summer Voice. If you Google Summer Voice, you will find all of our projects that we work on, like this one. We have videos up from our citywide parking study just last week. We'll have video footage up from this one quite soon. We got a lot of people working hard behind the scenes to make this process as inclusive and as transparent as it can be. And yet you all have good and important ideas. You've raised them tonight. You may have other ones that occur to you an hour or 2 from now. So please reach out to us. We really want to be doing this together. With that, I'd like to wish you all a safe rest of your week. I'd like to thank you for your civic involvement and for your civil discourse tonight. This stuff is not easy, but I think we've done really, really well. And I want to applaud all of our residents, business owners, activists, and stakeholders. Be safe and be well.